Warning. The following contains flashing lights, loud noises, and the opinions of a retard
Two retards!
with too much free time. Hi, my name's Lager, and there is an ongoing theme in my life. Every morning, I wake up and realize there is a problem. Disco Elysium starts much like I begin my daily routine. Amnesia, piss-soaked, cum-stained party pants, I'm late for work, and I can't look at my own reflection in the mirror. And the awkward attempts at flirting with the first woman I meet. And the issues paying for my room. Honestly, I could probably have that one single joke run me for the first 5 or so hours of this game, but that doesn't sound like a productive use of my time to write, and neither does it sound like a productive use of your time to watch it. So instead, I've decided to sprinkle every single self-deprecating joke I mustered for this intro before I rewrote it into the rest of the script. And it'll just come out easy from left field now, because that's the fucking typical thing to do. Disco Elysium is the next in a long line of games that aim to please both the VG and TG boards, and as such, is an isometric RPG with far too much text for anyone without a literature degree to ever truly comprehend. No Truce with the Furries is a really word-heavy game, and I do mean really word-heavy. I mean Planescape Torment heavy in words. Which is, by the way, statistically proven to be a bad omen. That itself is part of the reason it's so difficult to describe what this game is actually about. Not only do you have to read a novella to get through it, describing it feels like a book report, which will be irrelevant to the next guy because they'll be playing with a slightly different skill setup and make slightly different choices, resulting in a few different pieces of context that render your opinion of the game entirely moot. Which, however, doesn't make it any less amazing, or any less obtuse. You play as a detective sent to investigate a very public murder whose self-destructive tendencies got the better of him just after he arrived on the scene, causing him to party really hard instead of doing his fucking job. Subsequently, this man here loses his fucking mind, does way too many drugs, and ends up an amnesiac with voices in his head. That in itself is already pretty bad. However, there is another teensy detail to take into account. The police is desperately overstretched. The district is in the middle of a workers' union strike, and my man here has already used up his vacation days. So the only way he's getting out of here and into the psychiatric ward he so desperately needs is if he solves the goddamn crime. To do that, he has to throw dice and add skill modifiers, because this is the CRPG scene where throwing small pieces of plastic and doing math with the numbers they show you is a time-honored tradition that I will not have any newcomer infringe upon. Don't tread on me, thank you very much. Oh, and yes, I like this game. I'm aware that makes me less funny. Don't worry, I got a proofreader to fix that problem.
I am sure this will have no consequences whatsoever. So you mean drunk on medical alcohol?
Crime novels are you can't write, you can't act, you can't make anything. You can't make anything original. Stop trying. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you on principle because someone can call me. It's nothing. It's nothing. Just be nothing.
Lick it, 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 lick it.
Said proofreader also likes this game far too much, so the jury's still out on whether that was a good idea or not. The council of voices in my head hasn't quite come up with a semi-passable rationale for it, though, so we'll just have to make do with whatever they come up with on the spot. They're fun characters, trust me. Yeah, you heard me right. The voices in your head are characters. They are also the same skills your character applies in his day-to-day, which means that during the regular, normal conversations he has with people, they'll randomly chime in with weird, potentially interesting, but probably useless monologues. And you can proceed to have conversations with them in the middle of your conversations. This is one of the things the game is going for it. CRPGs are horribly fond of walls of text, and the skills being able to talk breaks it up a bit. The conversations are snappy, kinda like Twitter posts, and just as informative. Which is to say, not at all, because it's not exactly a dialogue anymore. It's a group chat with the voices in your head, who are all fucking weirdos in their own special weirdo ways. Encyclopedia drops pointless trivia at random times, but is useless in finding out anything actually useful. Drama only ever calls the player sire because of fucking course it does. Electrochemistry wants drugs, booze, and sex. Not necessarily in that order, but necessarily in mass quantities. Inland Empire is cryptic because it's you going full David Lynch and making shit up as you go. Authority demands other people take you seriously instead of just as a cop. Reaction speed makes it a point to always speak first. And this physical instrument guy, he's convinced the best way around an obstacle is through it. Luckily, they can't all be in charge of everything Krasmazov's doing at all times, so you merely have to contend with the ones you've invested the most points into. Depending on that, new options and hidden checks display themselves, leading to repeat playthroughs being drastically different from one another. Hell, on my first playthrough, I actually missed the fact your fucking tie can develop a life of its own. Now doesn't that speak volumes, Breton? However, being characters, the skills also have flaws. Electrochemistry lets you enjoy things, sure, but it also knows perfectly well that the best kind of fun is the kind you don't remember the next morning. There's this beautiful moment about halfway through the game where after passing a difficult volition check to look into a woman's eyes, you're informed that every single one of the voices in your head is compromised because she's pretty. Or at least it is, in the opinion of volition itself. It's a voice in your head. What does it actually know? Surely this logic guy can't be compromised. He's not emotionally invested in sailor socialism here. He's physically incapable of that. Though he has been agreeing with everything she's been saying a bit too eagerly. Accompanying all of the insane voices in your head is the thought cabinet, which allows you to internalize everything from radical, inexplicable feminism to race realism to relentless self-hatred to any number of caricatural political opinions. All the cornerstones of a healthy, functional mind. There is, however, no telling which ones actually occur to you. More importantly, there is also no telling why the different voices in your head are angling to get you to agree with their hot takes. It's not like being a radical feminist would make you more successful as a police officer, especially since you'd have to quit drugs to get there first. Speaking of drugs, this is still a game, so imbibing them results in your numbers going up, and that technically passes for mechanics here in the wilderness of indie RPGs. By definition, this makes it superior to all visual novels, or abortions of visual novels, and the entire Japanese video game market, and inferior to roguelites, simulators, and whatever you call the monstrosity Adams has been working on this entire life. Disco Elysium doesn't have any combat, unless you would call trying to run out on your Roombo combat, nor any abilities to use, unless suicidal thoughts are an ability, in which case I'd like to apply for certification, because that is one department I am certainly not lacking in. The only thing you can do is walk around and perform skill checks, so you don't have to worry about things getting too difficult. The 4 categories of skills have a base score assigned at the beginning of the game, which determines the maximum amount of points you can grant the skills in said category. There is also the 2 traditional ways to improve the scores beyond that, cloves and performance enhancers. Interestingly, there is a health system. You can lose the game by simply running out of health and having a heart attack. You can also run out of morale and become disillusioned with your work, leaving the force. Preventing scenarios like that is possible through becoming a magnesium-based life form. However, this is a role-playing game first and foremost, and thus the health system also relies on your decisions in the story. The first time I found out I could avoid losing morale by simply refusing to accept the awful circumstances of life in favor of abstract daydreams was a moment of awakening for me. From this point on, I would be Detective Cousteau, and nothing could stop me. Zoom has managed to create a system that actively encourages making your protagonist a flawed, imperfect human being, and that lesson is one often forgotten in the sea of Life of Stumblers, Telltale knockoffs, and dialogue wheels. Even more impressively, on repeat playthroughs it remains difficult, if not outright impossible, to find an optimal build of any sort. Disco Elysium makes a point of allowing the player to manipulate every skill check it decides to present them with. On many occasions, this comes merely through waiting to try again later, but cleverly choosing the right things to mention to the right characters can change the difficulty of a skill check and let you try again. As does failing, for that matter. The game also encourages the player to invest their points into skills it's already presented checks for through allowing them to retake checks after the relevant skill modifier changes, which results in tighter spread of skills, and thus an easier time solving problems using those skills. Coupled with the frankly obscene amount of options available, there is no telling if we'll ever see everything this game has to offer, or if we actually want to. Yeah, I know, Planescape Torment comparisons are rearing their ugly heads again. Ignore them. They go away. Thankfully, there are other parallels to draw with RPGs of times past, namely companions, or companion rather, as the case may be. HDB is an absolute failure of a human being, a drunk, a miserable wretch, and a literal hobo cop. Kim Kitsuragi is a saint. The man with the yellow name is a piece of shit, and yet the lieutenant remains by his side, professional to a fault. Sometimes it feels like he could switch to the stick up his ass as a backup weapon. Other times, you may discover he actually enjoys having that stick there. Kim exemplifies the character-driven nature of this game. He butts into conversations Guillaume le Million here leads an earshot of him, complains about and berates his unorthodox investigative tactics, and comforts him during the tough moments police work brings. He has clear opinions and shares none of them because it's not his place. He doesn't care for the politics and endless squabbling of his superiors, and despite everything remains empathetic to the thing his friend is going through. Thorson and McLean is at its heart a buddy cop story between a normal person and an abject failure. But in a far more accurate retelling of that story, you're the abject failure cop, and your partner is more your retard wrangler, who has to rein your mounting insanity and poor life choices in. It's not pretty, and it's not meant to be. Disco Elysium does its best to make everything feel ugly, gross, and old, and yet manages to be far more beautiful than it has any right to. Sure, there's kids here who are being abused, and the drug problems are so rampant that King was founded with an entire kilo of cocaine up his nose, and there are the comparisons you can draw between Revachol and 1956 Hungary, and there's probably someone from the CIA out here, but have you driven a boat and listened to Santa Fe yet? Because that shit fucking rocks. The memes are thus justified. Martinez feels less lived in and more lived out, like it's barely keeping itself above the water, literally and figuratively. My first thought was to liken it to certain parts of Paris after the recent protests, but the truth is, the studio behind this is Estonia. All they had to do to make this place look like it's seen 3 decades of hostile occupation is look out the window. Which makes it all the more ironic they also tried to tell you communism's a good idea. Not that it's any different from the rest of the things Disco Elysium says, which is taking drugs is totally good if it helps you solve a case, parroting racism is positive if it helps you get past a huge black man, or that centrism is a viable political stance. The game constantly suggests there is a world behind Martinez, that there is a city of Revachol surrounding it, that there is the boot of an oppressive coalition government crushing it, that everyone here exists in the Twilight Zone. It's a strange world, one on the brink of breaking apart and being consumed by the ever-encroaching white nothing that is the Pale nobody understands. A literal non-existence. Something that Harry yearns for, apparently. Something that is most definitely not disco. There is dark places in this world, places that light avoids. The strange and the old rule from just out of sight to the tune of British sea power. Good guys aren't a thing here. There's only the 30-year-old bullet holes and the nationalists who made them. The cops are the only real power in this place, or they would be, were you more competent than the peacekeepers the local communist uprising uses. There are PTSD-riddled, heavily armed mercenaries roaming the streets of the city, dispensing their own justice. There's drug trade in the rafters, and you need your cut. And at the height of it, here it comes. Death. Disco Elysium is above all else an experience. It's a game about a broken human being trying to pass off as a regular officer of the law, and failing. And somehow that makes it great, despite its shortcomings in the technical department and the communist propaganda. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because all those things remind me closely of the suffering that is my own existence. Maybe because I can identify with the longing for something I've lost a little too well. Maybe this adventure game masquerading as an RPG just got into my head. Or maybe I just find Sailor Socialism's Cigarette India's dead inside voice hot.
You people have like worms in your brain, honestly.